Hi everyone, welcome to this research tutorial for week 6. Here for week 6 is kind of an enjoyable week where we are really focusing on kind of the ethical implications of nursing research. We've talked about before the use of IRBs when we are using participants in our study and the importance of that, of really being transparent and protecting our patients as they enter into studies and that sort of thing. And so this is going to be a week where we look back at some of our historical context of how we have gotten to this point of really needing to protect our research subjects. And we will take a look at the movie Miss Evers' Boys and kind of have a week of really focusing on the ethical implications of nursing research and using our test subjects in a fair and ethical manner. So let me share with you this week our one PowerPoint that we will go over on ethics. Again, this is week 6, so your final paper is due this week. Once I'm done going through our ethics PowerPoints, I will go over one vital time, kind of the things that you would need to have in your final paper due to be submitted this week on Sunday. Again, it's really important that your subjects would understand what the purpose of your study is and that they consent and be informed and all of those things before they would ever participate in a research study. So we will take a bit of time to look at ethics and research here. Again, some of the things that we need to go over for this week is just a brief history of the events that have helped shape our kind of ethical human involvement in using healthcare research subjects. We will take some time and go over the 1978 Belmont Report. We will go over the 1986 ANA Guidelines for Nurses in Clinical and Other Research, and a closer look at a scandal from our history of the Tuskegee syphilis study. And again, you'll spend time this week watching Miss Evers' Boys. Quit school. Do you want to end up like your father, a career lab rat? Again, this is a funny comic here of what it means to be a research subject. So again, a brief history of kind of the way that we have evolved, hopefully, in our ethical approach to using research. Medical ethics has been present quite early on in history, although not specifically for research per se. Circa about the 5th century BC, they had the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm and to really protect and do all things for the good of your patients. The American Medical Association had their first code of ethics in 1847, and in 1893, the Nightingale Code was developed. That the very first requirement of nurses is to do no harm to the sick. That we will hold in confidence all personal matters committed to my keeping and all my family affairs coming to my knowledge in the practice of my calling. In the 1930s and 40s, we had, again, from 1932 to 1972, the Tuskegee syphilis study that was happening. We had Nazis in Germany doing research on unwilling human test subjects. And then at the close of that, in 1947, we had the Nuremberg Code, which was a direct result of kind of the experimentation that had been being done on human test subjects during the war. This was the first time when we had a set of kind of ethical principles that were laid out specifically in regards to the use of experimentation on human subjects. And the Nuremberg Code laid out 10 points for all of us to follow. First being that people voluntarily consent to being part of research that would be done on them. That research must be actually conducted for the good of society. that we actually do have a concern in conducting our research for the human subjects and the suffering that they may endure during the study. And in the 1950s to 1972, there were mentally disabled children at Willowbrook, which is a state school, who were deliberately infected with viral hepatitis. And this was research that was done to find a vaccine and or to treat. And so again, all of this just to say that we had the Nuremberg Code, and there were studies that continued to go on after that in violation of that code that we had all agreed upon. In the 1950s, the American Nursing Association had developed a code for professional nurses. They had not addressed research at that point. And in 1964, there was the Declaration of Helsinki. This was the first attempt of the medical community to actually regulate human involvement in research. And it really just reiterated very much of what the Nuremberg Code had to share, but it did go further than that. Not only saying are they voluntary, but they must be informed of risks and benefits. So that's where we get into informed consent that we deal with nowadays on IRB, and are people really well informed in understanding what they're signing up for. So informed consent may be waived for dependents, and that legal guardians can give consent in their stead. Continuing on in the 1960s, in 1966, we had the National Institute for Health Office for Protection of Research Subjects, and this is where this idea of IRBs became the recommended approach to having people sign off and kind of having secondary approval in the use of research subjects, human research subjects. And even at this point in 1966, this Tuskegee syphilis study was continuing to happen here in the United States. In 1958, the people that participated in that study were given a certificate of appreciation and $25 to kind of compensate them for their role in the Tuskegee syphilis study. In 1965, Peter Buxton, who was a social worker with the Public Health Services in California, first learned of this study and became perhaps one of the more famous whistleblowers of really kind of saying, hey, this is not okay that what we're doing here. So he filed several complaints over the next few years, although the study continued, and the Centers for Disease Control expressed concern over possible public image damage that was being done as a result of it. So in 1970s, the Tuskegee syphilis study was leaked into the press by Peter Buxton, and it really wasn't until July of 1972 that the story was broken by Jean Heller of the Washington Star. It was at that point that the study was stopped, that there was a congressional hearing that was held, and out of that became a class action lawsuit. And again, the award to each person, each man who was still living at that point, was $37,500 and a lifetime of medical care. This has had huge lasting impacts on our legacy of race relationships and trust between the African American population in particular and healthcare providers. To be used in such a horrific study for so long in violation of so many codes of ethics is just quite appalling, that it really took until 1972 for this study to really come to an end, and then for them to be compensated so little is just really quite troubling. In 1974, there was the National Research Act that established the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects. And in 1978, we had the Belmont Report, which was the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. They met for 4 days in February of 1978, and out of this meeting came the Belmont Report, which outlined new regulations in regards of using humans in studies, and it is still what we are using today in our IRB process. The Belmont Report had 3 ethical concepts. One being the respect for persons that requires the researcher to obtain the subject's informed consent to be a study participant. Justice, that we require equitable distribution of research burdens and benefits. And beneficence, that we require that the risks to human subjects be justified by the value and knowledge that the study is expected to generate. The American Nursing Association Guideline for Nurses in Clinical and Other Research from 1986 talked about 3 human rights that were specified: the right to freedom from injury, that we do a risk-benefit analysis and that we protect our vulnerable subjects, that they remain free from injury, that they have the right to privacy and dignity. Again, that researchers must make clear the type of data that's being collected and the methods that would be used for that. And that patients have the right to autonomy and confidentiality, that they would be coded by numbers, that their information would be protected. We also, as nurses, have voluntary informed consent. We have an obligation to serve on IRBs and to be a part of that process of making sure that our test subjects are being treated fairly. If nurses are required to participate in research as a condition of employment, they need to be told that up front. And then nurses have a dual role on that board of the obligation to protect our human rights and the responsibility to also protect and support research, that we promote evidence-based practice and growth in our practice and delivery of care. One last thought to share with you is, again, there is no right way to do a wrong thing, and so ethics is that we are called to constantly do the right thing, that we cannot repeat the mistakes of our past. And here are the references for this PowerPoint. Again, I hope that you are able to not enjoy, but perhaps learn something from watching the movie Miss Evers' Boys this week, as we really highlight the ethical problems that our country has faced in using people as research subjects. As I promised, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here looking at your final papers for your last week. Let me share my screen with you again. So in Moodle, you should be able to see this. This is the final project grading rubric that your instructor will be using for your final project and paper. So again, looking that you are using the correct APA format in your paper, citations, references, margins, spacing, titles, section headings, all of that, correct grammar, punctuation, spelling, etc. in your writing style will be worth 10 points of your final project grade. That your paper include a introductory background of why you chose this topic, why is it important to nursing. Again, as with any sort of research paper, you are giving me a purpose. What is the focus of your paper? Your PICO question should be included. What kind of databases did you search? What terms did you use? Kind of describing your process. What did you find? How many articles did you review? And how did you choose what to include, what to exclude? How did you pull out the data and going up a system to compare these studies? Discuss your studies, kind of design, interventions, outcomes. I would like you to talk to me about the data that you were able to synthesize out of your research. Again, giving concise summaries of each article, and then moving to a synthesis of the research as a whole. Draw some conclusions about the evidence you found. What approaches were supported by literature, maybe which were inconclusive or not supported. There is a sample paper on Moodle that I would draw your attention to as well. Feel free to look through that paper and use that to kind of mimic in doing your work. Make sure to include a section on limitations of your review. Limitations found in the studies that you were doing, limitations in the body of research, missing things, What would you need to make an evidence-based guideline on your topic? And then a conclusion. Describe what your conclusion is, include a few sentences to answer your PICO question, and then for this class, you are to create a PowerPoint presentation, which will be your last part of this. So again, a PowerPoint presentation basically covering these same areas that would include your research question and evidence, the plan that you came up with that's kind of evidence-based, and then if you were to actually implement this, what would be the next steps that you would kind of need to do through your nursing manager. So again, about a 10-minute or so PowerPoint of your project that you did. Be sure to share that with us on Wednesday of your final week, week 7. And there is a peer review grid that is also located in week 7. Make sure that you fill that out, and you will need to do one for each of your classmates to evaluate their studies, their projects that they uploaded. So make sure that you turn that in to complete your work for week 7 as well. So it's doing the presentation and then also giving feedback on your peers' presentations. That is all I have to do this editorial video for week 6. Good luck in finishing your final papers. Again, as always, if you have any questions about this final project, either the paper or the actual PowerPoint, be sure to contact your instructor to get further information. All right, have a good week. Bye.